Number one is what I call personality mirror. This is the first of 6 hidden personality tests to see whether or not you have Asperger syndrome. Now, this is not clinical. That is to say, well, that's a nice way of saying I just kind of came up with this on my own, but I think it applies. But the first one, personality mirror, what is that? Well, it works like this. It's actually based on a verse in the book of Proverbs that says something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it says something to the effect, as you look into water and you see your face, you can look into the heart or the personality of another person and see your own personality. So that is a test. How do people respond to you? That is one way to tell, my opinion, that you may or may not have Asperger syndrome or just about anything. There's a good way to test this. You may be talking to somebody, and if you start talking in a very low tone, almost a whisper. Some people talk like that all the time, but try it and see how the other person answers back. Typically, they will speak to you in that same hushed tone. Or you may have noticed this. Have you ever been listening to somebody who was talking on the telephone? You had no idea who they were talking to because you could only hear one side of the conversation. That is the person who had the phone in their hand. But still, you could tell who they were talking to by the words they used, by their spirit, by their personality, or their persona they projected. That's the same principle. So what this person was doing is they were reflecting the personality of the person to whom they were speaking on the other end of the line, which I guess we no longer have telephone lines. We call it the other end of the, whatever, the other end of the tower, maybe, tower signal. That's a good term. So the first way to test, just look for your personality reflection. Look for your personality reflected in the personality of others. Number 2 is this. Eating habits. This is something that's kind of easy for me to test because, well, I like to eat, and I probably eat too much. But how do you eat your food? Do you taste it before you salt it? Or do you have this preconception of what it's going to taste like and you don't bother to salt it at all? Well, what I realize is that to people with Asperger syndrome may very well be more likely, because they like to think ahead and they're more intelligent, they may be more likely to taste their food before they salt it. And you may have heard this before, that a lot of business executives, when they want to hire somebody for a high position in their company, sometimes they will take these people out to dinner so they can watch them eat to see if they think ahead. And something else I noticed is that some people, when they eat, will separate their food. Do you do that? I think I do it most of the time. You know, if you got, what do you eat? Mashed potatoes and gravy on your plate, and you got corn on your plate, and or green beans or whatever you people like to eat. And I like to eat White Castle, but don't want to mix your onion rings with your White Castle. But that's a different story. But does it bother you? Does it bother you when your mashed potatoes touch your corn, or touch your green beans, or touch something else on your plate? That's an indication that you may be a very orderly person. Now, it's not a cut and dry proof that you have Asperger syndrome if you do that, or that you don't have Asperger syndrome if you don't do that, but that's one of those hidden little tests. Test number 3 is this: order of cleaning. Now, the point of all this is that people with Asperger syndrome tend to be organized. We tend to think, not intentionally, but it's just our natural way of thinking, to do things orderly or in order. So when you clean something, how do you clean it? Do you start at the top and work your way down? That's typically what I do, because I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going to dust the shelf, then the dust from the shelf is going to possibly fall on the shelf underneath it. And if I start at the bottom and work up, then I'm knocking dust downward. So I kind of work with gravity, kind of organized. And when I paint, like paint a house or paint a room, I do the same thing. I always start rather at the top. So if you're painting the outside of a house, first thing you paint is not the trim. The first thing you paint is are the eaves, the very top of the house, because as you're painting, paint's going to drip down. So you're doing that in a very orderly manner. That is an indication that maybe you may be displaying the traits of a person with Asperger syndrome. So number 4 is, well, let me add something to that. I just look at my notes here. There is this 80, what I call an 80-20 rule when it comes to doing things well, doing things right. Perfectionist, I'm not sure there is such a thing as a perfectionist. Maybe I heard once that Donald Trump had his personal jet airplane. What does he fly, a 747 or something like that? He had the interior of his plane redone. I mean, the whole thing. Okay, you're multi-billionaire. You can afford to do stuff like that. But he insisted that even the most minute detail had to be perfect. That is perfectionism. Well, that's not me. I'm not that far along. I'm 80-20. So when I'm working on a project, you may notice this with some of the videos I make, that I want it to be at least 80% right. Now, if it's a little bit off, I'm going to let that slide, because if I keep doing it over and over and over till it's absolutely perfect, I'll never get it done. So you got to break somewhere, and that break is 80-20. All right, so number 4 is the 80-20 rule. Does that apply? Maybe, maybe not. Let me know what you think in the comments if you'd like. Number 5 is what I call typo-phobic, and the 80-20 rule actually applies to this. So I do a lot of writing, always have, enjoy writing, and I tend to make a lot of typos. Part of that is because of carelessness, part of it's kind of part of speed, rather. Sometimes it's just, I don't know how to spell a word. Well, we got spell checkers now, which helps out a lot, but still, I am typo-phobic. Have you ever been reading something and you just notice there's a typo in what you're reading, and you have this odd, this compelling to contact whoever published this thing and tell them you misspelled this word? Maybe you have Asperger syndrome, because that bothers you. A lot of people, they just read over typos, whatever. They may not even see them. Or they may see them and say, big deal, everybody makes typos. But if that is something that bothers you, well, maybe you're a typo-phobic. The word that I made up for this. Why? Well, once again, because you like things neat, you like things in order, and you notice when things are not neat and when things are not in order. That takes us to number 6. Speaking of being hyperphobic, some people are, they're just punctual. I mean, they got to be someplace, they got to be there on time. It bothers them immensely to be 1 or 2 minutes late. Now, when I go someplace, for example, I had lunch today with a couple friends, and I left 15 minutes earlier than phrase it this way. I gave myself 15 minutes more time to get there than they're actually required, because, well, you might get stuck in traffic. You might have a flat tire. Might get a speeding ticket. Me, fat chance, because I usually don't speed. But you never know. There's some unforeseen thing. So I like to be punctual whenever possible. So if I'm going to the doctor, the older I get, I'm pushing 70 years old, as I like to say, I've seen a thing or two. I like to share what I've seen with you. That's why I share these videos. But as I get older, I'm finding that doctor's appointments tend to multiply, as do the grandchildren. But when I go to the doctor, I always give myself an extra 15 minutes travel time, just in case there's a traffic problem. I don't want to have to call the doctor and tell him I'm going to be late or have to reschedule the appointment. Years ago, I was a pastor of a church, and for 12 years. And one of the things I noticed when I was pastoring is that people had time habits. They had punctuality habits. That is, there are some people who every time we had church, they would show up late. And you could look at the clock and you would know that Mrs. So-and-so was going to show up at 17 after. I don't know why people do that. Why don't they just leave 17 minutes earlier? I don't know, but it's part of their makeup. It's who they are. I'm okay with it as long as they come in quietly. They come in whenever they want to, as far as I was concerned. But by the same token, there were some people who inevitably would show up 10, 15 minutes early, which is fine with me too. Most people would kind of come in right around the time to start, a few minutes before. But this thing about punctuality, that to me suggests, well, maybe that is an indicator that you have Asperger syndrome, or at least it's an indicator that you have a trait that is commonly associated with Asperger syndrome. Do you see on your screen those two rectangle boxes? If you like what you hear, want to hear some more of it, well, we can just keep on talking as long as you want to have the conversation if you click on one of those boxes. Otherwise, we will see you all next time.